Welcome everyone to our quarterly online meeting. It's been about, what are we? We had all four. So we're about 7 quarterly meetings into being online. And go ahead and switch to the next slide, Jess. So today we wanted to introduce this concept of tokenism. Some people may be familiar with it, some people may not be familiar with it, but we wanted to start talking about it because it relates to other things that will be coming down the line from multiple sources. And so I'm going to start out with just giving an introduction about tokenism and why we're concerned about it. Why are we even having a discussion about it? And then we're going to have a couple of our members, Rebecca and Jared, give their personal experiences that they've had with tokenism. And all of today's webinar is going to be really free flowing. If everyone could just mute themselves until we get to the discussion area. But we're going to have a really free flowing, informal conversation so we can really start to talk about all the things that are related to this and all the things that are changing. So after Rebecca and Jared will talk a little bit about an evolution of things that are happening, and I'll introduce that, but Sasha Rabchevsky, John Gansel, and Jen French will talk more about that. And then we'll end with some emerging resources that Heather Gainforth has been developing, and then I'll tell a little bit about, and actually Barry is on here. If he's still on here, he can volunteer to talk about that, but I was filling in for him. And then we'll open up the floor to question and answer and full discussion. So let's go to the next slide, Jess. Sorry, I do have a little bit of animation, but so what is tokenism? This is actually a definition that comes from Heather's manuscript that she's going to talk about at the end of this, because her manuscript is going to be about meaningful engagement. And tokenism is really the practice of making only a minimal or symbolic effort to actually do something. And so, for example, it could be like recruiting a small number of people from an underrepresented group to give an appearance of equality. And if you go one more, Jess, it really what it embodies is when a partner is asked to endorse something and they really don't have any control over it. And so we're going to get into more examples of that. And the goal, we want to promote engagement because we want people with spinal cord injuries to be part of research, not just as participants, but as partners. And because we really believe that that will really strengthen the research on many different levels and make it relevant on many different levels as well. And so that's our vision of where we want to go. So we want to make sure that we're not just having tokenistic engagement. And why is this a problem? There's actually quite a bit of literature about this. Many other disease entities talk about meaningful engagement, and they've had experiences with tokenism. Go forward one more, Jen. And ultimately, tokenism is used to describe when engagement goes bad. But there's several different layers to it, and they call these dimensions in this particular publication. The first dimension, if you go forward, is this idea of unequal power. And it's really an unequal power between the researchers and the partners is where it usually imbalances. And it's kind of rooted in that traditional mindset that the researcher makes all the decisions and no one else is involved in that. Another concept of tokenism is this idea of having limited impact. So sometimes where somebody includes a partner just to check off a box, that's a requirement for them to do it. But they really, they ask people for their input and there's no impact at all in what they do. And the third dimension is these ulterior motives, which sounds kind of sneaky. And some people, ulterior motives can come out without actually really planning them. But it may be where an example is if you get input, but then you only take a portion of that input to kind of shape the message that you want. And then lastly, just this concept of opposite of meaningful engagement. And then if you go forward again, Jess, there's some implications to this. And one more step, having an unequal power in the favor of the researchers or the research system. Go ahead, Jess, I shouldn't have done that many animations. It can result in no meaningful change, limited meaningful change, or changes that align with the personal or the professional goals of the decision makers or the researchers. And we all feel, I think our field over the last couple of years, our community has really felt like we want our voice to be part of research. So we have to be able to have some kind of impact there. So go ahead, one more, Jess. And now I'm going to open up the stage for Rebecca and for Jared to share. They'll spend about 5 minutes each sharing their personal experiences that they've had in situations that were tokenistic. And then we'll go on from there. So Rebecca, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure, thank you. My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a person with a spinal cord injury level C5 through 7. I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit called Backbones, serving people with spinal cord injuries. And so when we were talking about this topic in the committee meeting, it really resonated with me because often I get people reach out to me with, because of Backbones wanting to share research with me, to participate on an advisory board, or to share the information with people in our network for recruitment. And so I wanted to share a little, some recent experiences, some that felt, they felt wrong, and I didn't exactly know how to explain why they felt wrong. But when we were talking about tokenism, I was like, oh, that's it. That was the feeling I had. And one of them was, I was recently asked by a large institution to be on an advisory board and to do, they were submitting a grant for some research. They had a meeting that they scheduled for us to give input, but as we were doing the meeting, they really rushed through all the information and then said to us, you know, what are your comments? And I think we had probably less than 5 minutes to comment. And the comments were very surface, or the ones that people wanted to get more in depth were sort of shut down very quickly. And they were like, okay, thanks, let's move on to the next thing. And so we went through it with really not having an understanding of what the actual research was for. And ultimately, the researchers wanting us to sign a letter that was pre-written, saying, you know, please be on our advisory board. Here's the letter that's pre-written, and that you're supporting our work. I felt uncomfortable with that because I really had not grasped the information, and I felt like I was just being asked to be on this board so they could check off a box, like Kimberly said earlier. And really, like, I was not part of the process or helping inform any of that research. And ultimately, I did not sign the letter. I did not become part of their advisory board. And I didn't say the reason why. I just said that I, was busy, and, after I kind of regretted not speaking up about it and saying, how they could have done better and included our community a little bit better. But, that was what happened in that experience. there was another research that was sent my way where it was something for youth with spinal cord injuries. And a lot of the people on the advisory board were scientists and medical professionals. And then myself, who was injured very young at 13 as a child, and then also a parent. And so in this case, I felt like it was great that they had included us and they have been asking for our input, but I also feel like it could include more people. I am not a representative of everyone with a spinal cord injury. My experience is different than others. So I think, also including people and more diversity in the groups that are, I guess, recruited to be part of advisory boards or to be, to share their lived experiences. Like in my case, my parents are immigrants, don't speak English. My story is not representative of everyone. So I think that it could have been beneficial for them to have other representation as well. And then recently I've had a very positive experience where I've been asked to be part of a board, and they have set up meetings where there's multiple people with SCI on this board. We were first asked to meet each other, get to know each other, and then we have been included on different meetings, multiple meetings where we get asked, our experience, our input, and I feel valued, I feel heard. And they have also provided a stipend for us for our time, which I think is important because often we're asked to share this information and we're not compensated for our time. So I just wanted to give those three different experiences, and I think it might resonate with some of you as well. And I know Jared has some of his own personal experience as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. And just before Jared, anyone feel free to put in chats or comments in the chats as we're going along, and we can discuss them more as we get to the end as well. So Jared, are you here?
I'm here.
Excellent. Go ahead and share your experiences.
Thank you. I vaguely heard you just briefly say you were looking for some of us in the beginning of the call. I wanted to let you know I had the wrong link. There was a few of us there.
That's a total mistake on my part. I apologize.
No worries. No worries. I just wanted to acknowledge that. So good to be here. And thanks for allowing me the opportunity to share. So a couple of different things I wanted to just kind of say. The first was that I didn't even know the idea of tokenism until you shared about it at that last meeting, and it started to dawn and come kind of wash over me that this that we could be being used without the sorry. No, I thought somebody had something to say. That we could be being used for a particular end, and it may perhaps even unintentionally. And so a little bit about my background. I am a T10 paraplegic. I got into a car accident in 2014. Great music, Dave.
If everyone can just mute, that would be great. Thank you.
Ready to go on band play. Injured in 2014 in a motor vehicle accident, and Asia A complete paralysis. And I was at the Miami project. I did many studies down there. And one thing that was very interesting and powerful about that experience was that I had the sense that everybody there really was pulling for people with spinal cord injuries. And but as a participant in the research, I didn't get to know about the research oftentimes. And I really had to kind of dig to get any information. And it wasn't until later I really could appreciate that, because I could see like, well, they wouldn't want me to be influenced as a participant of the research, be influenced perhaps by where the intended outcome was of the research. So fast forward a couple of years, I had the experience of someone reaching out to me personally, saying that they got my name and my number from someone else who thought that I'd be a good participant in an advisory board. And after speaking with this company and the gentleman who was bringing it forward, they wanted me to be part of an advisory board that would pursue a particular drug that could limit spasticity. And they were applying for a grant and for the Department of Defense. And so this is my first kind of interaction with what it is to be in this position. And there was a couple of things that just didn't, I just wanted to make a contribution. And so in many ways, I felt like it was a good step forward, at least for me personally, to be able to do that and to learn more. And at the same time afterwards, in reflecting about it, there was a letter of support that I had wrote, but they wanted me to tweak it into a particular way so that it was focused on getting the grant and how that would impact our community. And it was centered around spasticity and the reduction of spasticity. And while I know a lot of people with that problem and with that particular circumstance that inhibits their ability to participate in life the way they'd like to, I'm not one of them. And so I had the experience of kind of when I'm representing them without really having any direct experience with how that really influences. So I could really see how the benefit would have been to have a group of people, not just me as an isolated individual speaking from just my experience. And I think that's about 5 minutes. But just real quick, so there was that. There was the letter of support, and that we didn't end up. I never did hear back about the experience. Did we get the grant? Did we not get the grant? Where are we at in that process? So anyway, I think it's just a great topic. I think it's something that we can utilize as a way of educating people on both sides of the fence to empower us to actually have the research translate and make a difference for all of us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jared and Rebecca. Jess, let's go to the next slide, because I think that actually fits in very well. I made this little graphic to try to help us with this concept of evolution. We went from a period where there was absolutely no engagement, no input from people with spinal cord injuries. And we're going down. We want to end up at the bottom where there's meaningful engagement all the time. But sometimes you have to start where there's nothing. Just like Jared was kind to say initially, it was a learning experience for him. So we're going to have Sasha talk about his experiences as a person with spinal cord injury, but also a scientist, and how his perspective has been sought and how that's evolved. And then we're going to have John Gansel talk, who is a scientist, and he's going to talk about how his thinking of engagement has changed in relation to his research. And John does animal research or basic science research, if you want to call it that. And so the concept is meaningful engagement should impact all research, not just clinical research. So Sasha, you want to go ahead and start?
Sorry, unmuting myself. Yes, so I have been obviously at the various ends of this spectrum trying to navigate this whole thing. And I think that, so hearing Rebecca just describe things and Jared himself, I must say that I was very excited when we started this NASCIC venture to get our consumer voices heard. And I am, there's no chagrin, It's just that I'd like to also share some of my personal philosophy as how this is going, is that like Rebecca, I have gotten sought after by many investigators after DOD awards. And I really believe it's because I'm a low-hanging fruit for them to be able to reach out to somebody who they know in a wheelchair and who has some research experience, which kind of has turned me off a little bit, to be honest with you, because again, I dare say it's not as much tokenism as others might claim, but I still think there is a bit of, look, we want you on this paper, we're going to do you justice, just sign off and let's go. When I just texted to Rebecca, when I've been involved, I've actually said, well, what is my involvement going to be? And they're all very kind of patronizing. Oh, very limited. We just want you to be involved. And, well, do I have any input? Do I have any say? Can I read anything? It was very limited. And maybe to a certain extent, some people were surprised because they know me personally. And they're like, well, this work kind of stuff. And so I think that there is a little bit of checking off the list going on right now, because it's kind of a mandate that people are, and admittedly, Kim has been helpful, as well as Jen and Barry. When I get people asking me, and especially when I know it's because they don't want to do their homework, I point them to NASCIC, because that is what we have a structure for. This is what we help people to do. But I immediately get this, oh, I was told to do that too. Like, in other words, they didn't not know about it. They just didn't want to do the homework, and they want to reach out to somebody who's a little bit more familiar to them. Having said that, I think we're just working through this, and obviously we're going to have people, unfortunately, like Rebecca, who finds that there's not a lot of responsiveness from these people, but she kind of admitted just on the thing, she didn't really say anything, right? And I think that that's a problem where we're all feel that we have no place with these scientists. They don't need to hear. Yes, they do. They need to hear it, even if they don't have answers for it, or if we don't even articulate our questions very much. They need to be exposed to these kinds of, in my opinion, these kinds of questions that relate to not just what their project is, but how is it going to be for the better good. John and I, Gansel, who's going to be talking next, we struggle sometimes with our own preclinical models to say, how is this going to benefit somebody in a wheelchair? And quite frankly, there's times where we have to realize that there are just some things that aren't going to translate right away. But if you're open with people with spinal cord injuries, I think they're much more receptive to that, instead of saying, you sign off on this and we're going to have a golden bullet and your name will be by it. And that's where I think Jared may have fallen into the cracks as well. It's intimidating. It's also quite frustrating when you are demeaned by talking down to you, saying that we want you as part of this group, but you're like, well, what do you want me part of this group for? They don't even have an answer. They don't say, well, we want you to help our guide or research. No, it's more like, well, we want your participation, period, without any kind of exclamation as to, well, we have a mandate now. Even if that, I would like to hear that, right? Like, why are you, well, because we have to have a person with spinal cord experience. And then I guess the other thing that what happens when you are asked and you say no? Do you then start off a cascade of people who just like, well, these damn paraplegics, they don't want to be involved with this. So why are we having to do this in the first place? I worry about that. If more people say no, then yes, that it's going to be kind of a, well, we tried, but they just weren't receptive enough. In other words, they'll say that they're not responsive. And I don't know how we keep track of that. Anyway, I don't know how many minutes that was, but that's kind of my overall perspective. I still think that it's extremely valuable. I think that since NIH 2020, a meeting 2 years ago, that this helped NASCIC in and of itself launch this effort. And I think that we still need to, and here's the crazy part, we haven't really struck the iron, and we need to be striking a little bit harder. And how to do that is where, I guess, we can talk about it as a committee or a group, but people like Rebecca and myself, if we are asked, or even, for instance, newcomers like Jared, speak up, say, I'll be honest with you, I'm hesitant to do this because I don't know what you want from me. And if they can't articulate it, move on. I mean, I think that's appropriate. And maybe Rebecca didn't even have the time to get that off her chest, but just, you can tell when something stinks, you kind of know it stinks and you don't understand why. And you don't want to be upset people, but at the same time, you've been asked to volunteer your time for what? And that's sort of where I would like to end my part.
Great, thank you,
And
Sasha.
questions if you have.
Yeah, well, we'll have lots for discussion at the end.
Hmm?
John, do you want to go ahead and talk now?
Sure. So I'm John Gansel. I'm at the University of Kentucky. I'm a basic science researcher, PhD. And, I'll give you just a 1-minute blurb of kind of how my thought process has evolved. Probably it was at one of the research meetings, probably 5 or 6 years ago, someone presented some data and said, oh, we're on the cusp, and of finding ways to sort of improve through research, spinal cord injured individuals' outcomes and stuff. And I was like, I remember hearing this 15 years ago when I was a graduate student. And at the time I was getting promoted. So my research, career was getting a little bit more stable. And I said to myself, I don't want to be hearing this same story over and over again. And personally, I've got another 20 years of research in front of me, and I don't want to be curing mice. I mean, I want to know that over the next 20 years, the work I'm doing actually means something and not something just for the research community. So, that was around the time. Then shortly afterwards, we had SCI 2020. And in the process of it, someone approached me whose daughter recently suffered a spinal cord injury. She was in graduate school, and they just said, hey, do you have a postdoc, or I don't know. So I reached out to this individual. I just said, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but, you're welcome to kind of join us. And she expressed some interest in kind of her attitude was, hey, if I'm going to be doing research for a career, and she was studying like something completely removed from neuroscience and everything, nano engineering or something. She said, if I'm going to be doing research, then maybe I should be doing spinal cord injury now that I'm a year out from my injury. And so she started joining our lab meetings every week. And, it sort of evolved to getting some involvement, some feedback, and a different perspective on the research we're doing. And it actually led to some very tangible changes for us, because we got a request to do some work with alcohol. And I had this idea I thought was amazing. And I ran it by Sam, who is this individual I'm talking about, Sam Summers. You may not know her. She's fairly involved in the community. And she was like, I'm not so sure that what you're proposing is really an issue for the SCI community. And she said, let me go out to this forum. I have a forum, and I'm going to put it out there. And I'm going to ask people if they think this is sort of a good area to research regarding, alcohol and sort of spinal cord injury. Turned out my idea was of zero importance to the community. We changed the scope, and we did, something that was really informed from her. So I think that was a good example, perhaps, of how involvement and some perspective guided our research a little bit. Ultimately, what happened to Sam, graduated, she decided she got a job in industry. It wasn't in spinal cord injury. She took that job, and we haven't, and then I talked to the lab, and I said, I want to continue to get feedback from the community. But we actually realized we needed to define that better. And for all the reasons I think you're saying, what do we actually want for feedback? And we have an individual, one of the postdocs in the lab. So he's finished his graduate work. He's in the lab. He has a brother who has a spinal cord injury, and it's his motivation for getting into the field. And so we still have a little bit of tie to the community. And he, threw out some ideas there about ways we could do it. And to be honest, I sort of said, yeah, I sort of dismissed it. And he emailed me afterwards. He's like, you dismissed me. I am an individual with lived experience. And, we need to, this needs more conversation. And I was like, you're absolutely right. The things that were brought up earlier, I am guilty of it a little bit. I think I had, maybe an agenda or thought process about how involvement in our research process, what form it should take. And so what we decided to do is I said, I'm going to step back, and I asked the lab itself and the individual lab to kind of come up with a working group and outline what our expectations are, what are our desires for this. And I didn't want to be part of it as much, because I think I have a lot of preconceived ideas and biases about things. And so that's where we're at, is trying, probably, I think, to avoid tokenism by having a clear understanding of the expectations of both groups, you know, the researchers and involvement, trying to identify what are the outcomes that we want. Is this, are we, you know, one of the things that was brought up, are we just trying to sort of showcase our research for the community so that we can say, oh yeah, we're doing stuff, or are we trying to actually, you know, get involvement and feedback throughout the entire process? And if so, what sort of individuals or what sort of feedback do we need? And until we can define those things, I think that it's going to be harder for us to sort of reach out and get involvement. So, I mean, we're not using it as a hurdle to not get people involved, but we're trying to get a better idea of really what the benefits and for both sides and how we want to do it. And we're trying to come up with a formalized structure to pay people. I mean, to me, I think that's critical. I've seen a number of grants recently. I've been on a number of study sections, some that have required it, and everyone has these budgets and they pay their co-investigators who give some feedback. They pay these people, and then they have, you know, an SCI advocate, and they're not paid. And so I'm just writing this in the grants, like, why are you not paying them? I just don't. I think this as researchers, I think this needs to be standard if we're going to start asking for feedback, and it provides buy-in on both sides. So it's an evolution for sure. I don't know if I'm going about the right way. I will say that my sort of asking the lab members to do it has got them to you guys. And now like 3 of them, I think, are involved in different, the course that's being developed, and I met with Barry and others. So I mean, I think they're going the right direction, but I really think we need to clearly lay these things out and clear the expectations. And some of those expectations may fit for some researchers or for some individuals with lived experience that are going to be part of that process, and not for others. And I think that the clearer that those expectations can be defined, then we can start what is a long-term, to me, working relationship for a common goal. And it's not going to happen through short-term, quick meetings or anything.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That's at least you're thinking about it. I mean, that's what we all have to do. I mean, there's no perfect way to do it yet. And actually there will never be any one perfect way. There are different ways to do it. So that actually leads us into Jen.
Do you mind if I just follow up just for a second? That what John is also trying to extend, and I also believe this, is that we may not be changing the ideas of our peers necessarily at this point in time. What we're doing is we're introducing a new concept and way of teaching for our youngsters. And it may not happen overnight, but let's say 2 or 3 grant cycles pass and this is the way it is. People will have to, and I want to be better prepared as a consumer advocate to be able to say, okay, this is how I can be used, or this is how you might be able to use my resources, as opposed to being given a piece of paper and saying sign on it, which is very, deflammatory. I don't like that at all.
Yeah. So that actually leads us into how do we get about to meaningful engagement, and Jen French is going to help us transition a little bit, and then we'll get into some emerging resources.
Thanks, Kim. I think you guys can see me. So yeah, thanks, Sasha and John. What a great experience. The way you've talked about the evolution and how you've kind of grown into it. But, for those of you out there, we do encounter tokenism. And I think part of the thing that we also need to understand is that the tides are changing. And it takes a while to change the direction of a ship, but we can all be part of that. And not to be intimidated that because you have lived experience with spinal cord injury doesn't mean you have to be a scientific expert. So there's a lot of things that can be learned along the way, and how some of our infrastructure is starting to change. And one of them, which is really big, particularly here in the United States, is that the FDA has actually put out some draft guidance on what meaningful engagement means. So they define engagement as intentional, meaningful interaction with patients that provide opportunities for mutual learning and effective collaboration. And those 2 points are really important. So it's mutual learning, meaning it's a 2-way street, like John had mentioned, but it's also an effective collaboration. So we're learning on both sides. And in that guidance, they also define 2 things. So they define what a study participant is. Kim, if you could click. for me. So a research participant is somebody that participates in research, right? Whether they're actually getting the intervention or if they're the control. So it's a clinical trial participant. You might look at different types of clinical trials, and if you want to participate, that's one thing. But they also say, well, meaningful engagement is also having an advisor. And advisors, they specifically define are individuals who are living with a disease or condition like spinal cord injury, and they serve in an advisory or a consultative capacity. And very specifically, they say they are not study participants. So when people say that, oh, well, I'm talking to the community because I talk to the people that are in my clinical trial, the FDA says, no, they need to have two different roles. And that's really what we're getting at, is that really looking at the experiences that Jared had and Rebecca had, is that we need an advisor, and that needs to be of mutual learning and effective collaboration. So Kim, if you could click forward for us. One of the things that we're doing at NASCIC is that we operate on projects, and we have a project review committee, a very active project review committee. And of course, if anybody's interested in joining, please let us know. But really, we have different types of guidance for the different projects that we review, whether it's a full project proposal or whether it's a letter of support. And the one I want to touch on today is the importance of when we review recruitment for clinical trials and what that means. So a lot of what we look at, and this is advisement for you all out there as well, is that really understanding of whether that what they're recruiting you for, whether there's been an ethics board or an IRB on it, and that means that it's for a clinical trial specifically, whether or not they're filling a need for the spinal cord injury community. So they might say, yeah, I want you involved, but just as John said, are we designing something that's actually going to fill a need for the community? And that's part of a meaningful engagement, is to understand what that need, understand the pain points of our community. And that's what you all can communicate the best. And then what's the involvement? Is it really engagement? Are they really shaping, helping people with lived experience help to shape the research and shape the recruitment going forward? So those are some of the key guidelines that we have for our review committee. So the advice that I put out there for all of you, and even organizations that might be approached by people wanting to have people with lived experience involved, whether they call it a mandate or whether the FDA is pushing them in that way. But there's a couple of things to think about. Is one, you want to be cautious if there's a trial and they're recruiting it for something that's not approved through an ethics board. And also, don't be afraid to ask how they are connected to the spinal cord injury community. If you're their only touch point, or if they're looking at building some meaningful engagement program. And also ask, what's required of you? What are they expecting of you? And also remember that, if they're asking you, just as Chan said, they're asking for your help and your resources, and that's your time and effort. And, I'm a big proponent as well, is that if you're going to be a consultant in an advisory role, you should be compensated for your time. And whether that's dollars or whether that's in another way, that's up to you. But I think it's something to think about in terms of looking at how we start to interact between the spinal cord injury community and our stakeholders, whether it's a regulatory agency or reimbursement, whether it's a member of industry, or whether it's a research institution. So really, we're starting to see an evolution of involvement, and we hope to keep the ship moving in the right direction. So I'm going to hand it back to Kim.
Thanks. Jess, go ahead and go forward, actually 2 slides. We're going to talk about 2 emerging resources, and Heather Gainforth is going to talk to us about the IKT guiding principles, which are actually an example of a great partnership as well. Heather, are you here?
I am. Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you everyone for sharing your stories today. I think they really resonate with what I hear often in the work that we've done around guiding principles. So I will let Jess change the slide. So as you've already started to hear about in this work and in thinking about engagement of people with spinal cord injury, research funders, SCI organizations, people with lived experience of SCI are increasingly encouraging researchers to partner with researcher users on grants throughout the entire research process. But what we're hearing today, and Jess can switch, is that we're talking about the idea of nothing about us without us. But in that is that we're hearing that that's not always happening. Yeah, you can flip it. So if we think about tokenism as the opposite of meaningful engagement, or the opposite of what we call integrated knowledge translation, the goal needs to be meaningful engagement in this type of research. So Kim and I and a number of other people on this call are involved in the creation of the first guiding principles in integrated knowledge translation. So we define integrated knowledge translation as the meaningful engagement of the right research user at the right time throughout the SCI research process. If you think about that definition, that sounds a lot different than what we've been hearing about in terms of tokenism, that it only happens when you're applying for a grant, that someone wants to talk to you, or only happens at one little piece where you might be strategic for them. Instead, when we're talking about integrated knowledge translation, we're talking about meaningfully involving people with SCI and people that use the research when you're applying for that grant, when you're planning the study, when you're getting that ready, when you're doing the ethics, when you're designing it, when you're conducting the study, when you're disseminating it. No matter what you're doing, you are actually making sure that people with SCI are involved at every point and that their role is meaningful to them. So that means that you have, as a researcher, checked in to understand if that person or ideally are contributing to and influencing a personal or socially meaningful research dissemination or implementation goal. We can switch slides. So what we did is we created 8 guiding principles to guide the spinal cord injury research system to foster meaningful engagement in research, combat tokenism, and also to ensure that research is relevant, useful, and used for people with spinal cord injury. It's important that I note here that we did this using a very rigorous process, the same process that's used to create clinical guidance, as well as general health guidance, for example, the physical activity guidelines for people with spinal cord injury. When we mean principles, we're talking about the values, the norms, the beliefs, what actually guides what's right and wrong in research. And I think we're very clearly saying here today that tokenism is wrong in research, and this is the opposite. We'll flip slides. So we have 8 principles in total, and you can go on our website to learn about more of them. Just to highlight a few of them. So partners develop and maintain relationships based on trust, respect, dignity, and transparency. Tokenism is not aligning with the idea of dignity. It's not respecting your dignity as a person. It's sharing in decision-making. I think about tokenism as the idea as representation without agency. So it means that you are given no decision-making power in how that research is done. If you're following the principles, you cannot do tokenism because you're sharing decision-making. Partners meaningfully benefit, number 6, highlights really clearly that you should be getting some sort of meaningful benefit, whether that is funds, whether that is impact that you care about when you're doing that, and that we respect the practical considerations of you being involved. So at every step in that research process, we should be thinking about how are people with spinal cord injury and their diverse experiences being valued here, and how are we addressing your practical concerns as being part of the partnership. It means that all of that has to be done with open, honest, and responsive communication. And so if communication is not happening, the principles are not being followed. I'll switch to the next slide. So on our website, we have a 1-page postcard, but we also have a ton of other resources. We are starting to become a bit of a hub around how does meaningful partnered research happen. And all of this work has been designed in partnership with researchers, research users, and funders. And what we've been doing is creating tools and resources on our website to help you. The 1-page postcard, first, the number 1 section tells you why we created the guiding principles and what their goal is. The second section there tells you what the 8 principles are. And on the last page on the back, there's definitions to help you. Those definitions align really nicely with what Jen just talked about from the FDA. We clearly delineate the difference between a research participant and a partner, and what the idea of what is tokenism. What are we talking about when we're talking about tokenism? On next slide. All of this work is open access. So you can go online and read our most recent publication that outlines exactly and transparently how we develop the guiding principles. If you're not into reading papers, I think another resource that I would highlight right now is our partnership was just featured in a podcast for this journal, where myself and Jocelyn Maffin, who is a person who works for a community-based organization for people with spinal cord injury and has lived experience, talk about tokenism and talk about why these guiding principles are so valuable for combating them. So if you're interested, I would really recommend checking that resource out. Next slide. Here's the information about where this all came from and why this was created. But at the end of the day, the guiding principles are there to rise the tide on how we do partnered research together. Our goal is to change the way researchers, research users, and funders work together so that when we do partnership, it's meaningful, it avoids tokenism, and that it is relevant, useful, and usable. And we are committed to transforming the system. So if you want to join us, please visit us at our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Excellent. Thank you. Let me just go through the last piece, and that's really what can we do to try to help people in our community better understand the research process so that they're not intimidated and they feel capable of discussing and asking questions and things like that. So go ahead, Jess. Several of you may know about this, but there's been a large group of people working on what we're calling the SCI Research Advocacy course. And that goal is to really try to empower people to feel like they are able to contribute and not be in some sort of foreign land of research. So we've done a lot of background work as well. There's a lot of information out there outside of spinal cord injury. We've tapped into that, and we are working on developing a curriculum. This is phase 2 right here. And actually by the end of this month, I keep pushing Barry, we'll have the first 2 modules come out. And then more will be rolling out as we go along into next year. And then we'll work on additional dissemination activities. But if you go forward to the next slide, this really is a collaborative code development activity as well, because we've got actually over 20 partners now, individuals with spinal cord injury, family members, researchers, physicians, and industry representatives that are all on this working group shaping all of the content. And if you go forward one more slide, these are actually the first 12 modules that are in progress. And so you can see there's introduction to research advocacy and understanding the research process. These will be the first 2 that come out. And then we go into different topics related to spinal cord injury and related to spinal cord injury research. What you don't see on here is an additional host of topics that will be related to psychosocial research and quality of life research. But then we also have a topic that we're developing, a module that we're developing, SCI 101 for researchers. So we can also try to help researchers feel more comfortable about spinal cord injury and how to best partner with people and what to think about when you're wanting to partner with people. So those will be rolling out over the next several months. And actually go to the very last slide. I want to open this up for discussion, but there is on this second bullet point, if people want to be reviewers of these different modules, because we want to get as much input as possible. If you're a person with spinal cord injury or a family member, you can go to this WUFU form link here and fill it out with your interest of being a course reviewer. If you're a researcher or a healthcare provider and you want to find out about being a course reviewer, please send us an email here at info. And then we also have the IKT Guiding Principles website, and we have additional resources on our NASCIC website. So with that, I really want to open up for discussion. There's been quite a bit of chat going on, but I'm going to be silent and let's hear people bring up different points.
Hi, this is Rob Woodlick. So, I think having been on the research end too now, I'm a person living with a spinal cord injury, but it's an effort to really reach out and, build something as a team. And so I feel like a lot of researchers don't have the mindset to include others in their own personal research, which I think then in turn turns to tokenism and disenfranchisement when they try to do it. Is there training for this or suggestions or?
Well, part of actually what Heather is working on right now after the guiding principles have been developed is understanding what might be barriers to their use and how to create tools to help people. Heather, do you want to go in a little bit about that?
For sure. So once we created the guiding principles, so as Kim said, we've always looked at the guiding principles as clearly defining what we want researchers and research users to do, but that means that they're only the first step. Now that we clearly agree to what we think people should be doing, what we need to understand is why can't you do it? And there are many reasons why people can't do it. This summer, we interviewed researchers to understand why they can't follow the guiding principles. And I feel like the summarizing statement from them is that in many ways, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that they are swimming upstream, that the system is not particularly easy or supportive in them taking these approaches, and we're not always trained to be able to do partnered research. So what it means is that we're trying to build capacity among researchers as well as research users to be able to come together and do these things. And it requires transformational change of the research system, which is intimidating, but as Kim's triangle beautifully highlighted, is we are moving down to the base of that triangle and starting to collectively push back, I think.
I think what John and Sasha have both mentioned is they're working to train the younger generation of researchers and correct the system. There's a lot of pressures on researchers, and they're on a whole variety of different scales, and a lot of things that are demanding on our time, but trying to create tools or create things that slowly make it easier to incorporate it will be helpful. And just talking about what's hard, what the barriers are, and brainstorming how to overcome those. Let's see, Jen has her hand up.
Hi, yeah, I just have a question maybe just to throw out there. Is that, we've seen some funders, some funding agencies that require consumer advocates or advisors on their teams, and we now see regulatory agencies starting to push for advisors. Is that perpetuating the problem of tokenism, or are they setting the right tone? I just want to throw that question out there to see what people think.
I think so. I mean, I don't know if it's my attitude, I think, is that from my side, I feel like the research side, and we can say the funder side maybe, has been, hesitant to offend people maybe, or we don't push research, we don't push maybe therapies forward because we're worried that maybe it won't work or something. And I feel like we need to break that down. I think we need to take chances. We need to take risks. Yes, we don't want to have tokenism, but we don't want to not involve people. So, and maybe that's the wrong attitude. Maybe that, maybe that'll lead to people being hurt in ways that, in ways that are ultimately detrimental. I guess my perspective is I think that this hesitancy has been what is detrimental. And I think we need to just kind of not put ego aside and admit we're going to make mistakes, and that's going to lead to something better than never be afraid to make a mistake. So that's my personal thought. And yes, I think it is going to lead to some tokenism. And then we have to, as a community, speak up for it when it happens, and learn from our mistakes.
And I can tell you from, I've had several experiences like Sasha described of even just this summer, someone emailing me the day before a letter of intent is due and say, Kim, literally saying, I have to check a box. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it, and so I put my reputation on the line, but I can do that, but also I think this hesitancy thing, we've got to get over it. People with spinal cord injuries have thick skin because there ain't no way you can get through life with, just people's attitudes and the things that you experience, you run into it, but I also want to empower us to all talk together, because what's the harm of talking, right?
I'd like to also echo, just because it kind of formed around the same time, NASCIC, when we formed, obviously that helped spark with the Unite to Fight Paralysis and the Working to Walk. And I'm telling you, you put people together, it changes things. It really does. It's changed Phil Popovich, it's changed Dana McTighe, even Jerry Silver, for that matter. We really put them on the edge, and they have to answer their questions. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's a revolution kind of a thing, but I think maybe it's overdue. I just don't people like to swallow it, and there's no easy way to give this pill. So I think we just keep forth and doing it. And again, I want to echo though what Rebecca was saying, is that sometimes there's just this disdain. You don't want to deal with this. You just F off. I don't give a shit about this. But if you do that, it dismisses our power in a way. Not anyone in particular, but the more we do, like, I don't want to be involved with it, the less they're going to be put off by trying to do it. And that's where maybe we ourselves, like you're talking about, having this course can really help each other out as to how we address people who are maybe not ignorant, but just less informed than we are.
And I see Heather has her hand up too. We're nearing the end of our time.
I'll keep it short, but one thing I would say about this idea of funders asking for it. Yes, I think we need to ask for it, but I think we need to be supporting and recognizing that the system is not necessarily making it easy for researchers to be here or research users to be here, and that we talk about rising the tide all the time. We need to rise the tide and make it so that when you come to the table that it's easier, because if we don't build capacity, and I do think there's danger, right, to continue asking for this without building capacity and supporting people to do this in a meaningful way, then you are creating tokenism and you are fostering it, and you're creating a breeding ground for it. If we do that, where we build capacity and we support groups like NASCIC and guiding principles, et cetera, to be able to support researchers and research users to do this, then I think there's potential. Then I think it's like you're lighting a spark and you're helping, but not without support. It's not fair to ask people to do it. In our lab, we talk about researching with integrity. You need to do what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy. And how do you do that, right? And how do we support people to do that?
Excellent. Well, there's been some great chat in here, and we are going to be archiving this up on our website so people can go back to it and access it and actually spread the word about it as well. And I think this is just a stepping point of our continued conversation about all of this. And I'm so glad that we've gotten so many different perspectives. And the more that we can encourage people to speak up, the better. The more opinions, the better. Even though they don't always align, you at least have to hear them. Yes, Heather, we can link the guiding principles to the NASCIC website. And I will go back through the chat, maybe just after you've got it saved, and see if we need to answer more questions that we didn't see. Any last comments from anyone before we sign off? Remember, September is Spinal Cord Injury Awareness Month.
Thanks for
Thanks.
bringing this up. I appreciate the opportunity to just have the conversation. I agree. We just have to start talking. We just have to not worry about offending people and just apologize and continue to move forward. So,
And I don't mind offending people, so
Sasha, you've never minded offending people.
We know, Sasha, yeah.
All right, well, everybody have a great night
Thank you.
and a great rest of your month.
Right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.